Have you ever wondered why extremely intelligent people with access to all possible knowledge still feel a profound emptiness that no theory can fill? Why brilliant individuals, capable of understanding complex systems and mastering sophisticated abstractions, often can't find meaning in the very act of existing? Hermann Hesse, the German-Swiss writer who received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1946, asked exactly this question in 1943 when he published The Glass Bead Game, his last and most ambitious work. In it, he doesn't just diagnose a structural problem of modern civilization. He exposes an uncomfortable truth that strikes right at the heart of contemporary illusion. Being intelligent guarantees absolutely nothing when it comes to living a life that makes real sense. In 1943, in the middle of World War II, while Europe burned in flames and the world seemed to crumble under the weight of barbarity, Hermann Hesse published The Glass Bead Game, a work he had labored on for more than a decade. But the story he tells doesn't take place in 1943. It takes place in the future, centuries ahead, in a time after an era of cultural chaos that Hesse called the feuilleton age, a period where culture fragmented, where knowledge became superficial entertainment, where wars destroyed universities and libraries, where humanity almost lost everything it had built intellectually. And from the destruction of this era emerged a solution. An isolated province, protected by mountains, dedicated exclusively to cultivating pure knowledge. This place is called Castalia. There, an intellectual elite lives completely removed from politics, economics, wars, from all the turbulence of common existence. They study music, mathematics, philosophy, meditation. They master the glass bead game, an abstract synthesis of all arts and sciences, a symbolic system so refined that only the most brilliant can practice it. Hesse creates this future world not as a utopia to be admired, but as a philosophical experiment, as a question: what happens when you protect knowledge by completely isolating it from life? What is lost when intelligence separates from responsibility? He writes this in 1943, watching the real world destroy itself, and imagines a future where the attempt to save culture might end up killing exactly what makes culture valuable. Each day in Castalia follows precise rituals. Students wake to sounds of meditation, spend hours in silent libraries, practice the game in ornate rooms where mathematical symbols dance with musical themes. They converse only about ideas, never about people or mundane problems. Everything is perfect from an intellectual standpoint. Harmony reigns over every detail of daily life. Knowledge flows like crystalline water between minds prepared to absorb it. Beauty permeates each ritual, each gesture, each thought articulated with precision. And yet, something is profoundly wrong. Something that the very perfection of the system prevents from being seen clearly. The inhabitants of this utopia of knowledge live disconnected from external reality, so completely that they've even lost the capacity to perceive this disconnection as a problem. They don't participate in history, don't face concrete dilemmas, don't make decisions that affect lives beyond their own. Their entire existence is focused on contemplation, on cultural refinement, on preserving intellectual traditions that have become ends in themselves. They sincerely believe this has absolute value. But this belief begins to crack when Joseph Knecht, the protagonist, ascends to the highest position in the Castalian hierarchy, master of the glass bead game. Knecht represents the perfection of the system. He is the maximum example of what Castalia can produce when it functions at its best, a genius recognized by all, deeply respected, admired as a living symbol of what human intelligence can achieve when freed from the chains of the common world. And precisely because he's so intelligent, precisely because he so completely masters that world, he begins to perceive something the others can't see. His trajectory isn't one of conquest. It's one of progressive questioning that corrodes the apparently solid certainties from within. The more he masters the game, the more he questions the real value of it all. The more he's celebrated, the more he feels something essential is absent. It's not banal emotional dissatisfaction. It's not the boredom of someone who achieved everything too soon. It's something deeper and more disturbing. The gradual perception that a life dedicated only to the intellect can be, paradoxically, completely empty of existential substance. He observes his Castalian colleagues. Year after year, the same patterns. He sees elderly masters who dedicated 60, 70 years to the game, dying satisfied with their symbolic achievements, without ever having touched anything real beyond books and instruments. He lives surrounded by beauty and impeccable order, but he can't answer a question that becomes increasingly urgent, more insistent, more impossible to ignore. What is all this for? Think about that for a moment. What's the point of mastering a game of symbols if that game doesn't connect with anything beyond itself? What's the point of deeply knowing all the cultural traditions of humanity if you don't participate in humanity in a concrete way? The Glass Bead Game functions as the central metaphor of the novel. It's an abstract system that synthesizes music, mathematics, philosophy, history into a symbolic scheme of impressive complexity. Players create matches where they relate concepts from different areas of knowledge, producing harmonies of stunning beauty. A match might begin with a musical theme from Bach, develop connections with mathematical theorems that share similar structure, transition to philosophical texts that explore the same conceptual harmony, and culminate in syntheses that reveal hidden patterns between apparently disconnected areas. Only the intellectual elite can play competently. Only the most refined understand the subtleties. The game is considered the pinnacle of human culture, the maximum expression of intelligence unbound from practical interests. Players dedicate entire lives to mastering this system. Spectators watch important matches as if they were religious events, in reverent silence. But Hesse uses all this grandeur to expose a fundamental illusion. Knowledge that doesn't connect with concrete reality, that assumes no responsibility for anything beyond its own formal elegance, is just sophisticated ornamentation without substance. The game is brilliant, fascinating, but profoundly sterile. Castalia was created with an apparently noble purpose. This reveals a lot about how societies deal with profound cultural crises. After periods of historical chaos, devastating wars that destroyed universities, and cultural barbarity that burned libraries, society decided to protect knowledge at any cost. It created this isolated province where intellectuals could dedicate themselves exclusively to pure knowledge, without interference from the corrupt and violent outside world that had demonstrated the capacity to destroy everything refined and beautiful. The declared intention was to preserve human culture from the destruction that popular ignorance and political passion tend to provoke cyclically, to protect humanity's intellectual treasures from the masses who neither understand nor value them. But this initial protection, which perhaps made sense in the context of real wars, transformed over generations into radical and pathological isolation. The Castalians don't participate in the politics that govern their own material lives, don't face real economic problems of scarcity or distribution, don't make decisions that directly affect the lives of other concrete people outside their closed circle. They live in a bubble of intellectual purity carefully maintained. Sincerely believing this makes them morally and existentially superior to those trapped in mundane concerns. Hesse diagnoses here a structural error that runs through all of modernity and intensifies in contemporaneity. When thinking completely separates from living, when theory and practice stop mutually informing each other in constant friction, both lose meaning in different but equally serious ways. Thought without life becomes empty abstraction that feeds only on itself. Spinning in increasingly narrow circles, life without thought becomes blind barbarity that repeats historical errors without learning. Trapped in immediate reactions, the radical separation doesn't protect either one as Castalia imagines. It corrupts both in subtle but profound ways. If you've made it this far, you probably feel you're living in your own particular Castalia. But what happens when the walls of this ivory tower begin to crack? Let's look now at the mechanics of awakening. Knecht's awakening is gradual and painful, precisely because it comes from within the system, not from some subversive external influence. He's not a rebel who always questioned Castalia since youth. He's the perfect product of that place. The model student who embodied every value, every principle, every Castalian ideal. Doubts begin to corrode his most fundamental certainties, not because he failed to understand the system, but because he understood it too perfectly. He perceives that his life, however admired and celebrated by others, lacks concrete purpose. That goes beyond the system's circular self-recognition. He wonders if Castalia really serves the humanity that finances it, or only itself, feeding its own imaginary grandeur. If the knowledge they preserve with such care has any true usefulness for real people facing real problems, or if it's just a sophisticated game of intellectual vanities where intelligent people impress each other. These questions don't come from ignorance or inability to understand the greatness of the game. They come precisely from the opposite. Knecht thinks so well, with such rigor and intellectual honesty, that he eventually turns critical thinking against the very system that formed and celebrated him. He discovers that intelligence, when taken to its ultimate consequences without fear of uncomfortable conclusions, exposes its own limits as a source of existential meaning. On diplomatic missions outside Castalia, Knecht makes direct contact with the external world that the province so despises and ignores. He converses with Benedictine abbots who deal with the faith of thousands of people, reconciling doubt and belief daily, with politicians who make difficult decisions that affect concrete lives, knowing that each choice will save some and harm others, with doctors who face real diseases, real death, suffering that can't be resolved with symbols, with parents raising children, teachers educating confused teenagers, merchants supporting families, ordinary people who simply live without the protection of contemplative distance. He perceives that out there, people live real dilemmas that can't be solved with symbolic elegance or brilliant game matches. They fight for survival in conditions that Castalia doesn't even recognize as worthy of attention. They face concrete responsibilities, where error doesn't mean just a poorly played match, but true suffering of specific people. They make difficult decisions where no perfect answer exists, where any choice implies loss. They love specific people with all their flaws, not abstract concepts about platonic love. They suffer real losses that leave permanent marks. They don't contemplate theories about suffering from a safe distance. They fail painfully, get up with difficulty, try again without guarantee of success, in a cycle that concretely defines what it means to be alive. Can you see the contrast? One of the most revealing encounters happens between Knecht and a Benedictine abbot. The abbot represents something Castalia despises: faith mixed with doubt, knowledge applied to the concrete care of souls, responsibility for a real community that suffers, errs, needs. Knecht perceives that the abbot, with all his supposed intellectual inferiority, possesses something Castalia has completely lost: a living connection with the real. He doesn't just think about God, he deals daily with people who need God to survive. He doesn't just study sacred texts. He applies these texts in concrete decisions that affect specific lives. The abbot faces what Hesse calls suffered truth. It's not the theoretical truth that can be contemplated from afar. It's the truth that forces you to assume responsibility, that hurts you when you're wrong, that transforms you through direct contact with others' suffering. Castalia, in contrast, cultivates only theoretical truth, beautiful, harmonious, completely safe because completely disconnected from real consequences. You can be wrong about everything in Castalia and nobody will die, nobody will suffer. The worst that happens is a poorly played match, a slightly tarnished reputation. In the real world, being wrong has a price. And it's this price, this concrete responsibility, that Knecht begins to perceive as essential for meaning. Not optional, not inferior, essential. In this clash, he begins to see Castalia for what it really is: an island of cultural refinement that consumes resources provided by external society, but returns nothing concrete. An elite that considers itself superior precisely for being disconnected from common life. A system that confuses isolation with purity, alienation with excellence, intellectual arrogance with wisdom. Everything in Castalia is aesthetically perfect, in a way that enchants, but also reveals. The music performed there follows rigorous harmonic patterns. without dissonance. The meditations are deep and technically impeccable, following refined millennial methods. The rituals have choreographed beauty that impresses any sensitive observer. Even meals are served with elegance, transformed into exercises of Zen simplicity. But Hesse doesn't celebrate this aesthetic perfection. He criticizes fiercely. He shows there's a dangerous tendency, especially in intellectualized cultures, to transform knowledge into ornamentation, into cultural performance completely empty of real substance. When beauty replaces truth as the ultimate criterion, when aesthetics becomes more important than concrete function, when form completely supersedes verifiable content, knowledge loses its reason to exist. It becomes sophisticated entertainment for the privileged few who have time and resources to appreciate subtleties. Intellectual aestheticism is a specific form of escape from reality, an elaborate way of avoiding honest confrontation with concrete existence in all its inevitable confusion, inescapable pain, irreducible complexity. It's much easier, much more comfortable, to contemplate the abstract harmony of a perfect symbolic system than to face the chaos of a sick child, the ambiguity of an ethical dilemma with no right answer, the uncertainty of a decision that could ruin lives. Castalia offers intellectual comfort, offers the seductive illusion of control through complete theoretical understanding. But comfort is not meaning. Theoretical control is not authentic life. Beauty without truth is empty decoration. Everything we've seen so far is the surface of perfection. But remember, the more perfect the system, the more dangerous the flaw it hides. Knecht discovered that flaw. Knecht begins to question whether Castalia even has the moral right to exist the way it exists. The province consumes substantial material resources provided by external society that works, produces, and struggles for survival, receives continuous funding, food cultivated by peasants who will never play the game, military protection provided by soldiers who consider Castalia irrelevant. In return, it offers only abstract knowledge that very few people understand or value. It doesn't solve concrete problems, doesn't alleviate true suffering, doesn't improve anyone's life beyond the Castalians themselves, doesn't contribute to important political decisions, doesn't develop useful technologies, doesn't offer practical wisdom for difficult questions. Knecht perceives this as structural parasitism disguised as cultural superiority. An elite that lives comfortably at others' expense without assuming any real responsibility for collective destiny, for shared history, for urgent problems that affect everyone. Hesse argues that knowledge only has real value when it assumes concrete and verifiable historical and social responsibility, when it genuinely places itself at the service of humanity in its real needs, not just of itself as a closed system that perpetuates itself, when it faces the problems of its time with all available tools, instead of comfortably isolating itself from them claiming intellectual purity. Responsibility isn't abstract, it's not theoretical, it's concrete, verifiable, measurable in terms of real impact on the lives of real people. The Castalians consider themselves superior to the rest of humanity, in a way they don't even need to explicitly affirm. They deeply believe their erudition places them on a different existential level. They look at the external world with poorly disguised disdain, as if they were privileged observers of an inferior humanity, eternally trapped in mundane concerns they have overcome. Knecht perceives that this subtle arrogance is a symptom of profound alienation, not real elevation. Whoever judges themselves above common life loses contact with their own humanity. Intelligence doesn't confer true existential privilege, doesn't make anyone better, doesn't solve the fundamental problem every human being faces, regardless of cognitive capacity: how to live meaningfully. How to create meaning in a world that offers no ready-made meaning. A genius can be just as completely lost as anyone else. The difference is they perhaps have fewer excuses for not perceiving this condition, fewer illusions available to hide from it. Castalia exclusively values contemplative life as if this were self-evident virtue, considers mundane action inferior by nature, contaminated, crude, unworthy of truly elevated minds. believes that true knowledge necessarily arises from distance, from dispassionate observation, from pure reflection uncontaminated by direct involvement. Knecht radically questions this hierarchy that always seemed natural. He perceives that meaning doesn't emerge only from isolated contemplation. It also emerges, and perhaps mainly, from concrete action, from real engagement with the world, from active transformation that assumes risks. Contemplation without action is completely sterile, just as action without reflection is blind and destructive. Meaningful life requires both operating together, thinking deeply about existence, yes, but also acting according to that thinking, assuming all consequences, assuming real risks where the outcome isn't guaranteed, making true errors that teach what no theory can teach, learning from direct experience, not just from safe abstractions. Hesse proposes that contemplation and action must be integrated, continuously informing each other, not hierarchized so that one is superior. Here it's worth pausing to look around us, at the world we live in now, because Hesse's Castalia didn't stay trapped in 1943. It multiplied, digitized, became the invisible structure of our daily existence. We live in digital Castalias, algorithmic bubbles that isolate us from everything that contradicts our beliefs, personalized feeds that show us only what we already agree with, online communities that reinforce our opinions without friction with the real. We have access to more information than ever in human history, infinite digital libraries, courses on any subject, instant answers to any question. And yet, epidemic crises of meaning affect precisely the most informed people, most connected, most educated, generalized depression, paralyzing anxiety, profound sense of emptiness. Why? Because information without lived experience generates the same existential void Knecht felt. You can consume intellectual content for hours, watch lectures on philosophy, read summaries of great works, accumulate theoretical knowledge about how to live well, and remain completely lost about how to actually live. Contemporary Castalia isn't in isolated mountains. It's in your pocket, in the algorithm that chooses what you see, in the timeline that convinces you you're informed while systematically isolating you from the real, in the excess of information that replaces experience, in the illusion that consuming content about life is living. You can have strong opinions about politics without ever having participated in a real political decision, can have theories about relationships without ever having assumed responsibility for another concrete human being, can have knowledge about psychology without ever having truly faced your own suffering. Hesse's diagnosis has intensified. The problem he identified has become structural in contemporary developed societies. We have universities operating isolated from the society they theoretically serve. Research that nobody reads beyond other academics from the same subfield. Articles written in language so specialized they become inaccessible even to researchers from neighboring areas. Professors who spend entire careers without meaningful contact with the world beyond academia. Students who learn to produce knowledge for internal consumption without questioning its external relevance. We have sophisticated digital echo chambers where intellectual groups mutually validate without contact with different perspectives, or with realities that challenge their premises. Algorithms that reinforce existing beliefs, creating bubbles that seem complete but are radically partial. We have artificial intelligence capable of processing immense amounts of information, recognizing complex patterns, generating sophisticated texts, but completely incapable of any real understanding of human purpose, existential meaning, ethical responsibility. Systems that can simulate intelligence without having the slightest notion of what it means to live well or badly. We're reaching the point of no return. The decision Knecht is about to make isn't just a renunciation of power, it's an invitation to chaos. And it's here that our story connects with your life. Knecht's decision to abandon Castalia shocks the entire province, because it seems absolutely incomprehensible within the system's internal logic. He's at the absolute height of power that world can offer someone. He's the master of the Glass Bead Game, the most prestigious position that exists in the Castalian hierarchy. He conquered this position through decades of impeccable dedication, demonstrating not just exceptional intelligence, but also profound understanding of all the traditions the game synthesizes. He could spend the rest of his life admired by everyone who crossed his path, deeply respected by future generations who would study his matches as models of genius, comfortable in all material and intellectual senses that Castalia can provide. But he voluntarily renounces all of this, simply decides to abandon everything he spent a lifetime conquering, everything most Castalians dream of achieving. He writes a long and philosophically rigorous letter explaining his reasons, knowing few will truly understand. And he leaves without looking back, without regret, without final hesitation. This decision represents something radical that few human beings can do. The visceral understanding that meaning isn't in the intellectual recognition others give you, isn't in prestige within a system, however sophisticated that system may be, isn't in contemplative perfection that isolates you from life while convincing you of superiority. Knecht gives up absolutely everything intelligence can offer within that specific context, because he finally perceives, with clarity that no longer permits evasion, that entire context is fundamentally wrong at the root. It's not a matter of reforming Castalia, making it more open or less isolated. It's not a matter of improving the system while maintaining its essence. It's a matter of recognizing that the very premise of the place, the very founding idea of knowledge, isolated from life as the supreme ideal, is irretrievably flawed at the root. He leaves the mountain province to become a tutor to a young person in the common secular world, consciously trades the highest post of the intellectual hierarchy for direct pedagogical work with a single specific person. He won't teach the glass bead game to this young person, won't transmit sophisticated abstract knowledge, will simply accompany a concrete teenager in their formation as a human being. This apparently simple choice reveals where Knecht believes meaning is really hidden: in concrete relationship with another human being, in direct interpersonal bond that can't be mediated by abstractions, in responsible care for someone specific who is before you, not with general theories about humanity. Hesse suggests that meaning arises fundamentally from real encounter, from direct contact that forces you out of comfortable abstractions, from concrete responsibility assumed for someone who has a face, name, their own story. Meaning emerges from true presence, not from contemplative distance that protects you from the risk of really caring. Knecht's death happens shortly after his departure from Castalia, in circumstances that seem almost banal at first glance, almost ironic in their simplicity. He tries to accompany his pupil Tito in a physical challenge typical of teenagers testing limits, swimming in an icy mountain lake at dawn, and he dies in the effort. His body, trained exclusively for seated contemplation during decades of meditation and study, conditioned only for long hours in silent libraries, can't handle the brutal thermal shock of the cold water. This death might seem tragic in the conventional sense, an apparent waste of human potential. All that exceptional intelligence that could have produced brilliant game matches for 30 more years, all that extremely refined formation that represented decades of cultural investment, all that accumulated wisdom that could have been transmitted to future generations, wasted in an accident that could have been easily avoided with simple prudence, with the common sense to recognize obvious physical limitations. But Hesse doesn't present it as failure or error, doesn't present it as tragedy to be lamented, presents it as existential victory of the highest possible order. Knecht died living authentically for the first time in his adult life, died trying to connect with another human being through shared experience involving real risk of loss, died completely engaged in the concrete reality of the present moment, not contemplating safe abstractions from a distance that protected him. He died because he wanted to live, and truly living implies risks the pure intellect can't calculate or control. Genuine meaning necessarily implies existential risk, implies true vulnerability that exposes you, implies the real possibility of failing, of getting hurt, of dying trying. Whoever completely protects themselves from life to preserve intelligence intact to keep the mind functioning in theoretical perfection, ends up not truly living, just observing life from afar while the years pass. Castalia represents a tendency that has intensified dramatically in modernity. Knowledge increasingly specialized, but progressively disconnected from the totality of human experience. We know more and more about smaller and smaller slices of reality. We produce specialists who master restricted areas with impressive depth, but can't integrate this knowledge into a broader understanding of how to live well, how to create better societies, how to face problems that require holistic vision. Hesse anticipates the problem of contemporary academic fragmentation. The risk isn't specialization itself, which is necessary. The risk is the complete loss of connection with the fundamental questions of human existence that don't fit in any specialty. You can know absolutely everything about a specific subject and remain completely lost about the essential, how to live in a way that's worthwhile. Hesse makes a crucial distinction that most people constantly confuse: the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is accumulating information about the world. It's mastering complex systems of thought, understanding abstract theories, memorizing historical facts, deciphering mathematical equations. It's understanding causal mechanisms that explain phenomena. It's refined technique that impresses. Wisdom is something completely different, operating in a distinct dimension. It's understanding the meaning of existence in a way that allows you to live well, not just think well. Knowing how to conduct your life through uncertainties no theory can resolve. Deeply integrating intellect, lived experience, ethical responsibility, and genuine presence in the world. Recognizing when thinking more only makes confusion worse. Accepting knowledge's limits without despair. Castalia produces impressive scholars who master entire libraries, not wise people who know how to live. Produces brilliant players of the Glass Bead Game who execute matches of genius, not existentially fulfilled people who have found peace. You can have access to all accumulated knowledge of humanity, can have read all the great philosophers, can master 10 languages and 5 sciences, and still have no idea how to conduct your own life meaningfully when you wake up at 3 in the morning wondering why you exist. Wisdom doesn't come from books, however good they are, doesn't come from abstract systems, however elegant they seem. It comes from the difficult and always incomplete integration between thinking rigorously, living concretely, and relating honestly with others. It requires direct experience that transforms and hurts you, requires real error and humble correction that wounds the ego, requires profound humility to recognize that intelligence alone solves absolutely nothing when it comes to living well. Loving well, dying well. Castalia's structural problem is self-sufficiency that becomes pathological. The system closes completely upon itself. The game exists for the game. Knowledge exists for knowledge. There's no real external reference. When an intellectual system becomes completely self-referential, it loses contact with any truth beyond that which it itself produces. It becomes an infinite game of mirrors that reflect only each other. Hesse criticizes every form of thought that suffices unto itself. Knowledge needs genuine openness to the real, needs to be in constant friction with experiences it can't anticipate or control, needs to be tested, questioned, confronted with realities that resist its categories. Without this, knowledge becomes intellectual masturbation, entertainment for minds that prefer the safety of abstraction to the risk of reality. So, why isn't being intelligent enough for life to have meaning? Because meaning isn't born only from the mind operating in isolation. It's born from integration between thinking rigorously, living concretely, and serving responsibly. Meaningful life requires rigorous thought, yes. Capacity to reflect deeply on existence without fleeing from difficult conclusions. But it also requires concrete experience that transforms you through direct contact with realities that resist being domesticated by theories. Real engagement with reality in all its irreducible confusion, not flight to abstractions that protect you. It requires ethical responsibility truly assumed, honestly recognizing that your choices affect other concrete human beings. and that you need to deal with those consequences. It requires genuine openness to the other, recognizing that meaning emerges from real encounter that destabilizes you, from the bond that takes you out of safe abstractions. It requires profound humility to perceive that you're not existentially superior for being intelligent. It requires true courage to abandon comfortable systems when they stop making sense, even if it costs you everything you've conquered. Being intelligent is profoundly valuable. It's necessary, but it only generates real meaning when intellect serves authentic life, not when life is sacrificed in the name of isolated intellect, when knowledge connects with concrete responsibility, when thought integrates with transformative action, when contemplation doesn't replace experience but genuinely illuminates it. Hesse's solution isn't the abandonment of study, isn't rejecting knowledge or embracing anti-intellectualism. The solution is the end of divorce between what you know and what you do. The true exit from Castalia today is concrete responsibility. It's choosing a real problem in the world, a real person who needs you, a real risk that forces you out of theoretical safety. It's not accumulating more information. It's not reading one more book about how to live. It's not watching one more philosophical video. It's acting according to what you already know. It's assuming responsibility for someone or something specific. It's exposing yourself to the risk of truly failing. Intelligence without service is just vanity. Knowledge without application is decoration. Wisdom is intellect that accepts bleeding in the world. That assumes the cost of being wrong. That allows itself to be transformed by concrete reality that resists its theories. Knecht discovered this. He abandoned Castalia not because he hated knowledge, but because he understood that knowledge without life is just a game of mirrors. He died trying to truly live. And you? Do you still believe thinking well is enough to live well? Or are you ready to leave your particular Castalia? The question isn't whether you're intelligent. The question is, what will you do with that intelligence? Whom will you serve? What risk will you assume? What concrete responsibility will you embrace? Because in the end, meaning isn't in how many answers you have. It's in how many times you're willing to fail, trying to live according to what you've discovered to be true. If this video made you profoundly question the relationship between intelligence and existential meaning, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Share it with someone who needs to hear this.